okay? We are going to go from the top to the bottom of the contract, which means if you have the recordings to these sessions, you can say, I'm having a problem on page 3, you can open it up based on your outline, roll to the part of the video that covers that section and get all the guidance you need, okay? I'm not blowing my own horn when I tell you if you had every realtor in Citrus County in a room quizzed on the contract, I would win, okay? I've studied the contract, I understand the contract, I have a bit of a legal mind, and I've seen so many goddamn transactions. I swore I wasn't gonna swear in this so we could use it forever. But I've done so many transactions and my memory is such that I remember movie lines from 40 years ago. That helps when you're dealing with trying to find an analogy or a story that goes along with, if you do this wrong, this can happen, okay? So I want to impress upon you that of all the paperwork that you do in this business, this is the one you want to be a master in, okay? If you can only master one document, this is the one. This is you do listing contracts to cement your relationship for a chance to sell a seller's house. You do EBBAs to memorialize your agreement for a chance to find someone a house. This is where the money hits the road. This is where you bring those two customers together, generate a sale, and our whole income for the year is generated off of this form. So it's very important to know this, and there is no better way to gain confidence in your competency with a customer than a thorough understanding of this document. So without further ado, I'm not going to allude to any of the other forms. I'll give you those so you have them. But for right now, we are just going to roll line by line down the contract, okay? Okay. There is one part of the contract at the very top and one part at the bottom that isn't in a section, okay? So you notice that the first number is on line 6, property description. But there's a very important part of the contract that falls before that, and that is the parties to the contract. Very important to know. The only people who have a legal obligation through the as-is purchase and sale contract are the seller and the buyer. The seller representative, the buyer representative are advising, but they are not parties to the contract, okay? Very important to get this right. So the sellers, there's two places to get the seller's information. One of them is on the listing itself. It shows the seller's name, but don't count on that. Click on the property appraiser's file or the tax collector's file or something and make sure you're getting the actual name of the person with any initials or however they have it stated there. The other thing is that when you go into that form, but especially in the PAs, it has all the people on the deed. Because if in there it says Fred Smith, and you put Fred Smith, but there's a Mary Smith, okay, or maybe Fred Smith is dead and the actual owner of it is Mary Smith, Jane Smith, Bill Smith, and Bob Smith, the children, right? So everybody who's on that deed has to be in the seller's blank. If you run out of room for multiple ownership, you can put in the seller's see additional. There's a place at the end of the contract with a lot of lines, additional terms, but the additional terms can be, you can say, see the complete list of sellers in section 20 of this contract. Okay. By the way, in all the deals I've ever seen, I only need to do that twice out of like 6,000 deals. So, but it's important to know what to do if you run into that. For your buyer, we train you guys to get a copy of their driver's license, okay? You can send the driver's license to the title companies. because they have to ask for a driver's license, but they're gonna ask for it anyway, okay? There are people who have a driver's license that says Ethel J. Mertz, but they have a deed that says Ethel Jane Mertz, okay? So it is important that you let them, ask them, okay, is this exactly the way you want your name to be presented on the deed, okay? This is the time to find that out. Okay, section 1, and we're only going to get through about a third of the sections today because a lot of your work is in the first 8 sections. A lot of what you need to know. A lot of the 13-page contract is boilerplate. More than half of the language doesn't require any filling in. Okay, we're still going to explain those sections, but we can get through them pretty quickly tomorrow. So the property description, the street address, city, zip, that gets pulled in through your transaction software. You can type it in, locate it in. A lot of people leave this blank. Don't. Any blanks on here, you want to fill it in, even if you say, I'm not going to fill it in, which is NA, right? But you should, if you don't have something on every blank, then you might miss things that you did mean to put something into. If you're checking your form for its completeness, it's very important that everywhere there's an asterisk, there's something going on that line, even if it's none, if that's the way you fill it in, okay? The property tax ID, most people put the actual long tax ID rather than the alt key. Either is fine. The legal description, again, most of you don't always notice this because it gets pulled in from MLS. But if you're writing an offer on something that isn't in MLS, you know where to find that. It says the legal description is, in the property appraiser's page, it says the short legal description. The short legal description is the legal description for 98% of properties, okay? And if it isn't, it'll note that. Okay, so those are pretty obvious, and again, we've got an asterisk and an asterisk for the parties. We've got an asterisk on these 3 lines to get all the location data in, right? Now we've got a section that I really want to go through that has nothing to do, but you need to understand this to be able to fill out the next 2 sections, okay? I want you to just read through this section 3, 4, 5 times until you know it off the top of your head. Every time you sell a house in Citrus County, you're using it as is contract. So we used to have the problem that the as is and the regular contract had different expectations in them. So you had to learn the difference. You don't even need to do that, okay? When you buy a house and don't change the contract, when the people pull up to the house on closing day to move in, there's a house, right? And you have the range, oven, refrigerator, dishwasher, disposal, ceiling fan, light fixture, drapery, rod draperies, blinds, window treatment, smoke detectors, garage door opener, thermostat, doorbells, television wall mounts, and television mounting hardware, security gate or other access devices, mailbox keys, storm shutters, or any storm protection item and hardware. That's what's expected, okay? The obvious omission here, well, first off, let me make something really clear. The parenthesis S's after all these things means that if your buyer buys a house that has a refrigerator in the kitchen, a wine cooler under the countertop, a refrigerator in the bar, a refrigerator in the summer kitchen, a refrigerator in the garage, unless those are excluded, they're all included. If there's 1 refrigerator or 47 refrigerators, they're all included, okay? You want to make sure of that. Do you notice the word microwave oven in here?
No.
It's not included, okay? It always is included until the first time it's not, and you don't have a legal leg to stand on, okay? Certainly if a microwave is countertop, you just gotta ask your buyer if they want it. If you don't ask for it in here, they're gonna back it away.
If you put all appliances in that property part, does that also count as a microwave, or do I have to specifically say microwave?
Specific is better, okay? Specific is better, and again, everybody's expecting the microwave anyway. They're gonna think you're just a little anal retentive, but you're not. But that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it to be correct.
Yeah.
Okay? This is a contract, because people go to years and years of law school and sit for the most excruciatingly hard exam that probably in the country to be a lawyer, to write contracts. And you guys, with 40 hours of training and a once your check clears, swearing in at the Board of Realtors are writing contracts. So it's important that we know about this and we actually think about the import of our actions. Okay? Now, the obvious ones on here that everybody is used to seeing here on lines 21 and 22, other personal property included, washer and dryer. What are other things you always want to include? If you're dealing with a pool house, the words in here on every one of them, unless they specifically said they won't do it, you don't even need to ask your buyer. All pool maintenance equipment seen at the property on whatever day you showed it. Okay? If you don't want to make a complete list, okay, always better off to make a complete list. Now here's the reason why you wouldn't want to do it from a sales perspective. All the pool equipment, yeah, they can have that. I want the this, the this, the this, the robot, the that. Well, I don't give them the robot.
Right, exactly.
Okay? Now you might say, well, I can kind of sneak the robot in if I say all pool equipment. Don't try to sneak something. If you're trying to get away with something like that, all you've done is delay the dispute. Okay? If they weren't going to give you the robot vacuum cleaner when you presented the offer, they're not going to give it to you at closing just because you told them technically it's included. They're not going to do it. Okay? So this is the part where you're adding value. This crap, you just copy and paste it. You're copying it off of the deed. You're copying it off their driver's license. You're not even copying it. It's being sucked in by a computer out of other records. 21 and 22, the first time that you add any value, okay, this is when you as a professional protect your client. So the personal property needs to be defined. Just have a light conversation with your buyer. Austin, now listen, when you pull up with your moving van, okay, and open the front door with the keys that the owner gave you and walk into your house for the very first time, what do you expect to see in there? Well, they're going to say, I don't know. Well, let me tell you what's included, okay? Is there anything else in there that you're worried about? I would like to specifically mention the built-in microwave because it's omitted in the contract as written. I also think that we should ask for the washer and dryer, okay? Was there any other fixtures, outside of that you're interested in, okay? Or you get down to the next part, E, 24 and 25, where you put down in writing anything that's excluded, okay? Now, normally, the excluded comes into play when the seller goes, well, they don't think they're getting that, do they? Okay? So if they say, I'm not giving them the washer, I'm not giving them the dryer, I'll give them the microwave, but I'm not giving them the refrigerator in the garage, okay? And I'm not giving them the gas grill, the Coleman gas grill that's rolling around in the lanai that they asked for. On those, they can cross out the addition of them and make that point. Excluded items tend to be things like the antique chandelier in the dining room, okay? The window treatments in the office that were handmade by my grandmother, things like that, okay? So it's usually the purview of the seller to exclude things, all right? Sometimes they tip you off to that in the listing, sometimes they don't. But you don't exclude things if they don't ask you to. And you don't exclude things because they said they were excluded, just because they said they were excluded. Now, if they say the antique chandelier that hung in the house of my great grandmother, Queen Victoria of England, you're not going to get it, okay? But if they say the washer and dryer are excluded, still ask for it. Although I have had one washer and dryer that couldn't be transferred for sentimental reasons. The kids gave them that as their retirement present for when they moved to Florida. And they hardly ever used it, but they wanted to keep it because the kids gave it to them. It was worth more than money. Okay? But these are very important lines, and I want to make sure I'm stressing this. If this job was just fill in the blanks, okay, and collect a full check, you're not being fair with your customers, okay? We charge for premium service because we're premium agents. We know this stuff. This is where you make your money, okay? By communicating these things to your buyer and make sure you're not leaving anything on the table. Okay, let's get through the purchase and pricing section 2, okay? And basically what section 2 is the agreed upon sale price, how much money is being put at risk, who's closing it, when is the escrow money coming, by the way, who's closing it, now I'll go over additional deposit because you don't have that on many of these. Financing, okay, is any of the purchase price being financed by a bank? I'll go into others in a second. And then the balance to close is simply this minus this minus this minus or plus this equals this. Okay, if you're using the contract that does the math for you, you don't have to fill this blank in. Okay, and it will continually change as you change the numbers. If you're not, get the calculator out. Okay, it's an irrelevant number anyway. The balance to close is the number at the bottom of the HUD. It's not the number at the bottom of section 2. It's just basically there to say, no, you don't need to bring the whole $300,000 to the closing table, Fred. You're only going to need to bring the $60,000 down payment less the $10,000 you're putting down, $50,000, right? It's also there to make sure, for consumer reasons, that the seller understands that just because you sold your house for $400,000 doesn't mean you're going to get a check for $400,000. Right? In this case, they are. It basically says that because the things that come out of their check aren't really covered in here. Okay. Now, here's the things I want to point out. The purchase price, whatever you offer, that's what you offer. If they counter, they're going to change that. That's fine. The initial deposit should be, if you're representing the buyer, okay, as low as you think you can do without weakening the offer to a point where you're putting it at risk of not getting accepted. Okay, there is no rule of thumb here. Okay, and by the way, does anybody know how much deposit you have to make in an offer? Okay, you gave the old answer, $1. There has to be consideration for there to be a legal valid contract, right? Statute of fraud.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually not true anymore because a federal court said that in contract law, the promise of payment is enough. Okay, now by the way, that court decision is why you have line 30. That you can execute a contract without any deposit. Okay, you're just saying we're going to send that in 3 days. There's no deposit at the time of contract. If you did that 20 years ago, the contract wouldn't be effective until the money was received. Okay, that's not the case anymore. So if you have a VA loan or something, you could put 0 in there. Good luck with your seller. But you could legally, it's a legally binding contract if you put 0 in. You all know the pluses and minuses of this number. If it's too low, the seller's going to wonder what the hell's going on. There's nothing at risk. They can just keep shopping and just cut me loose if they find a better deal. But if you're writing your contract right, it kind of doesn't matter what you put in the deposits because they're gonna get it back anyway because the contingencies are gonna protect them, okay? And after you take this class, you will write those contracts so the contingency protects them. So basically what I always recommend at a minimum is 3 days after the thing is executed. Why? Because you should, if you take a check with the contract and you send it out and the agent calls you right back and laughs at you and says, I'm not doing it. I always wrote void on the check, made a copy of it and gave it back. But technically, if somebody wanted to, that is in the gray area of against the law. And once that check is delivered to the title company, it will sit in their account for a minimum of 10 days before they can legally refund it to you and it's fully collected by their lending institution. Okay? That's why I like at least 3 days. Be liberal with it, okay? If the guy's going to, we're heading back to Montana tomorrow, and I'll send a check out on Monday, and then it's got to get from Montana to Citrus County, not the hub of mail delivery in the United States of America. Then you might need 7 days, okay? If they give you a hard time about that, you just put something in the additional terms. Buyer agrees to send proof that payment was mailed within 5 days, but put 7 days here because this says received, made payable, and delivered. Words mean things, okay? Okay, title company, that information is provided in the listing. If they don't fill out everything completely, do a little research, type Shifting Sands of Ohio Title Company into your search engine and get the information if they're not providing it. Call them up and say, who would handle this close? Who do I send emails to? Do you have a fax number? Oh my God, I've got to call the title company just to complete a transaction where I make $4,000? This seems excessive. No, it's not. It's called professional, okay?
Bill, shut up. What have you written? 2 things?
What was that?
Oops.
I know she was giving a hard time too. Okay. Now, the second thing that I want to bring to your attention is additional deposit to be delivered to escrow agent within. I use this field in only one situation. You write the offer up, you offer $1,000 in the initial deposit. Part of the counter says they want $5,000, okay? Then I put $4,000 here on line 37, right? Yeah, 37. And I take whatever amount of days I needed to get the initial money there, and I add the amount of days in the inspection period.
That's what I did.
So if this is 3 days and it's a 10-day inspection period, I would put additional deposit or escrow within 13 days of the effective date, $4,000. Why do I do that? For the same reason that we are circumspect with putting checks in before we have an agreement. Why tie up $4,000, have to go through the process of the returning of that money before the I can quit for any reason clause of the contract goes away, okay? Anybody who won't accept that is not playing. One of the problems with your training, and you're finding this out a lot with commissions, is you're being taught the exact right way to do things and finding out that 90% of the agents you deal with don't know shit, don't know stuff, no swearing in this. This is a long-standing recording and we don't swear. Okay, so, but that's the right way to do it, okay? Now, if somebody says, I want to put 50% down, okay? Don't put that in the initial deposit. Don't put that in the additional deposit. Remember that word, deposit, okay? Because everything in part A and part B together you're fully on the hook for if you default, all of it. So if you do a $300,000 deal and you put 10,000 deposit, 140,000 in 10 days, and they default on the contract, $150,000 is forfeitable. Don't do that, okay? If they want to put more money in, put it in line 40, other. Additional funds to be transferred to the title company pre-closing, $140,000. Okay? You're totaling up the numbers correctly, you're stating everything's gonna happen, but you do not put any, you don't put $1 more of your buyer's money, $1 more at risk than you need to.
You can't put that under E?
What?
You can't put that under E?
E is balance to close.
Right, if they're coming in with that and then.
Well,
the
you,
rest is
you don't have to put it in there, you should talk them out of it. Why send money somewhere where if something doesn't work out, it has to be sent back? Why not just send it the day before, like everybody else does? What's the upside? I've had it happen back in the day because people were funding their purchase,
Oh.
getting all the money in there, and then putting their keys on the counter of the home they lived in, calling the bank and saying, I'm out of here. Okay, and before they got a deed in lieu of foreclosure, torpedoing of their credit rating, they were closing the deal on their next house. So they needed to move all that money beforehand. More than you needed to know. As I said, I've been in almost every situation over the years, so I know where these things come into play. Okay, financing expresses a dollar amount or percentage. In your mind, you should see this as financing expressed as a percentage. Do not put a dollar amount on here, okay? If you use a dollar amount, you have an 80% chance of being fined and a 20% chance of screwing up and probably a 5% chance of a catastrophic screw up, okay? What do I mean by that? We're going to go over the financing contingency. Contingency says that I can't close on this unless this happens. And if this doesn't happen, we need to cancel the contract. And I'm not defaulting, I'm exercising contingency. So give me my escrow money back. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you have to protect the financing contingency like it's the most important thing in the world. We're gonna get into this in the loan approval date that we've talked about before, but I also want to get into it here. If you're getting a conventional loan, the bank will loan you up to 80% of the purchase price or the appraised value of the collateral, whichever's less. So if you buy a house for $300,000 and the bank finds out that it's only worth $280,000, they will lend you 80% of $280,000, not $300,000. Okay, which means that you're going to have to come up with $18,000 more at the closing table. If your buyer doesn't have an additional $18,000, they can't close.
Or.
Okay, and most of our contracts, we do not do what is called an appraisal contingency. Okay, maybe it's because you're thinking like a salesperson and you're saying to yourself, well, if I put the appraisal contingency in there, that'll spook the seller, and my offer won't be looked at in the best of light. Okay? That's how I always thought about it. But maybe you're just what the hell do I want to do another form for? Okay? Maybe you're that way too. This is where you can protect your client. So in that situation, you've asked for 80% loan. You put the 80% in here. Okay, and it's a $300,000 agreed upon price, and the appraisal comes in at $280,000. Your financing contingency kicks in because the financing contingency says I can't buy this house unless I can get a bank to loan me 80% of $300,000. I can't get $240,000. I can't buy the house. They'll only give me $228,000, whatever those numbers are. Finance contingency kicks in, you have at least leverage to ask for a reduction in price. At most, the ability to get your buyer, extricate your buyer from the contract with all their money intact. Okay? So use percentages there. Okay, time for acceptance. Time for acceptance, I won't spend a lot of time on this. I think standard for most of us is 2 days, okay? They actually put in here that they have 2 days. You have 2 days to respond to any counteroffer that comes in. So if we're writing a contract right now on January 15, 2025, we might write January 17th in there. Or we might write January 18th, thinking the business day is more than half gone, and I don't think this house is in such a demand that I might get more for my buyer out of not pushing them, okay? Or you might be like me and always put the same day. Okay, if I was writing this contract, it would say 5 p.m., 1/15/2025, 5 p.m. And then here's another thing you guys probably don't do. Every contract I ever sent to a seller's agent always included a narrative email that it was attached to. Okay? Listen, I just wanted to get an answer as quick as I can because my guys are really anxious to find out because they're looking at other properties. If for any reason your buyer wants to consider our offer but can't come to a decision that much, just email me. I'm sure they'd be glad to extend it. Okay? So I haven't extended it. And if he calls me the next morning and my guys say, you know what, we've been thinking about it all night, we want to go with number 2, I don't have to worry they signed the contract and send it back to me in the morning because it's gone. But again, your mileage may vary. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. We just did a lot offer for a guy who lives in Alaska or the backwoods of Maine or something. No email, that kind of thing. And it's right in the listing that says, give us a week to respond. So it doesn't make any sense for us to put today. Okay? So you use your own head, but this is an important date. And the other thing about this that I want to point out to you, line 45 is the only deadline on a contract that starts from the moment it starts immediately. Whatever date it is, there's no time limit. It has a specific date. Okay? So closing date too. So time for acceptance and closing date, you actually pick a date rather than an amount of days. Okay? What does that mean? That means that if they come back to you 2 days after they rejected your offer and want to make a counter, technically you've got to have something in writing that says that your offer is still alive. Okay? In many cases in the contract, like a lot of the deadlines in here, you can cancel the contract, but it isn't canceled unless you exercise that right.
Yeah.
Okay, so to some extent legally, and again, you don't want to get into legalese, you want to have everybody on the same page. So when I know of a technicality, technically you don't have to change that at all. If you accept their counteroffer, or you accept their acceptance of your offer after the date, it's accepted. That date can't be used to then void the contract. But I always think you're better off having that date cleared away so everybody's on the same page. All right. Next section is, why won't it just give me a little bit of this? Oh, I gotta move you guys up to the top, I guess, so that I can see. Okay, so once you've dealt with the time for acceptance, closing, and again, it just bleeds into page 2. The closing of this transaction shall occur when all funds required for closing are received by the closing agent and collected. That's that word again, right? That's why they ask for wires and why they used to ask for certified checks. Just because you write a check to somebody for $100,000 and hand it to them doesn't mean they have $100,000. Banking practices will delay the collection of that money in that individual bank account. So that's what the word collected means here. Received and collected pursuant to standard S. That's basically, anytime you see pursuant to, that just means something else in the contract, okay? And all documents required to be furnished by each party pursuant to this contract are delivered. That's what the closing means. Unless modified by any other provision of this contract, the closing shall occur on, okay? Here's where I tell you that putting slash before is a meaningless change to a contract. And you, anytime you receive that on your listing, you need to have a conversation with your seller about the fact that it is meaningless. If you put on or before May 1st, what is the closing date? May 1st.
May first.
And if you put May 1st, what is the closing date?
May 1st.
And if somebody wants to close earlier, say they want to close April 1st, how would you accomplish that in the contract that said May 1st was the closing date?
Addendum to the contract?
You would have an addendum to the contract that says buyer and seller agree to move the closing date up to April the 1st, right?
Right.
That's the same way you change on or before, okay?
So have-
This is not one of those things like, where you don't need to do an addendum. You know how we do that thing on the contract that says may assign but not be released from? We do that so that somebody can unilaterally correct the seller line to add their trust or their godson or to change, to correct the incorrect spelling or whatever without going through the formal addendum process. This is not the same thing. On or before is a psychological thing. Let's put on or before on our offer. That way the seller knows if we can, we'll even close faster. They'll get excited and we'll get thought of better as an offer. It's irrelevant, okay? And the seller sees that and they think, on or before, why are they doing it? Oh, because they might get, they might be able to close earlier. That would be great if they could close earlier. Nobody has to do that. It still has to be approved by all signing parties, meaning the seller and buyer, okay? And here's where you screw up. Buyer goes, oh my God, I just got a call from the bank and they can close on April 1st. Isn't that great? Can you let them know we're gonna close on April 1st? And then you call, and it's like March 15th or March 18th, and you call the seller goes, everything's scheduled for May the 1st. I can't just change everything now. We don't move into our place until May the 1st. The movers will charge us $400 for a change fee. We can't do that. Now your buyer's pissed. Why is it on or before? I want it to be before. Before is acceptable. It can be on or before. Because that's what English language tells you that means, but it's not what legal language tells you it means. Stay away from on or before, rule 1. Rule 2 is, if somebody foists on or before on you, you will almost always be the seller in that case, right? Let your seller know. On or before is irrelevant, that's the closing date. If they can close before, they can propose that and you have every right to say no and close on the date here. You're under absolutely no obligation to close except for that date.
Yeah.
Okay?
You can always do an
Just make
addendum.
sure they know. Just make sure they know. And I have no reason to believe they're going to be prepared to close any earlier than that date. None whatsoever. Okay? No more than I do with people who don't write that nonsense phrase on there. Okay? Was I clear enough? I don't want to go into the weeds too far. We don't do on or before. When we have to receive on or before, we make sure that our side of the transaction is fully understands the before part of on or before is irrelevant to the contract. It cannot be changed without mutual acceptance. The extension of the closing date. You should be reading through the things that don't have a asterisk, and I would recommend that you read through every line of this contract. That's what I did. And everything I didn't understand, I highlighted, and then when I was all done, I went back to all the highlighted sections, and I copied and pasted into my Google search, and I found out now you can do it through AI. And AI will teach you like a professor what all these things mean, if you forget, okay? But this talks about the CFPB which might change a little bit, because it's a stupid rule and a stupid law, and it might get changed by the new administration if they can. But for right now, it's a contract. What does it mean? It means that this is the part where the bank tells you, we can't close on Friday because we couldn't get the CD out until Wednesday, and we have to have it out for 3 days. Oh. And because you did Friday before a Monday holiday, we can't close till Tuesday. Oh. Okay. This is that part. But it's also the part that protects your buyer. Because if it happens, you can extend it for up to 7 days. Okay? All set? And again, if it's 7 days and the 7th day is a Sunday of a Monday holiday week, when is the new deadline?
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Okay, if it's 7 days and the 7th day is the Tuesday after a Monday holiday, what's the new deadline?
What?
It's a trick question.
It's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday. And when we get to this section, we'll go over this. The time is of the essence. All days are calendar days. You have to count weekends and holidays. You have 10-day inspection period. You have to count every day from the execution of the contract to 10 days. The only exception is when the deadline date falls on a weekend or a holiday. And if the deadline date falls in there, because you counted them all the way up, okay? It's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4 is Christmas Day. Day 5, day 6, day 7, and it's a 7-day period, that's the deadline. Still the deadline, it doesn't matter about Christmas, okay? But if the deadline hits on Christmas, then your deadline becomes the 26th. If your deadline hits on a Saturday, your deadline becomes the following Monday. If it happens during Martin Luther King week, it's the following Tuesday. So the only time
So
holidays...
the inspection period does count for holidays?
Any deadline in the contract, except for the acceptance date, okay? Now I can exempt the closing date because you wouldn't schedule a closing on a holiday. If you put an offer in and say it's due on December 25th, it's due on December 25th, okay? But all the other deadlines, the inspection period, the loan approval period, the 3 days to get your escrow money into the bank, all of those deadline dates are calendar dates, including weekends and holidays. The only exception is if the deadline, the 10th day, the 7th day, the 3rd day, whatever that deadline is, falls on a weekend or a national holiday. Okay? Well, it's Flag Day. That's not a national holiday.
So if my 10 days, what she's asking is if my 10 days in my inspection period is up on a Sunday, it's not till Monday.
The inspection deadline becomes Monday. That is correct.
I just want to reiterate for her.
Okay? Make sense?
Is that
Megan?
what you're saying?
Who said what?
Megan asked.
Did Tammy just say something?
Yes.
Yes, I was asking about like if we got acceptance on a Friday, so then we have like till Monday to put an escrow, like for them to do escrow in 3 days then, right?
Right, which is no business days if you do it at 4 o'clock, right?
Right.
They can't even wire the money until the deadline day. They'd have to wire, okay? So yeah, always try to get a little extra time. Be flexible. Don't put your buyer in a situation, you don't want to put him in a situation where you give him so much time he doesn't even think about it, but you also don't want to put him behind the 8 ball. You don't want to put the closing date so close that if anything goes wrong, he's going to default. Okay? Force majeure, you're going to hear those words a lot. Force majeure basically means act of God. When you hear about act of God, it means something completely out of your control, okay? And out of all the parties of the contract control. The one where that comes up the most is hurricanes, okay? There's a hurricane and the closing was supposed to happen in coastal Crystal River and they're 4 feet underwater and they can't do it. And this says, what do we do now? Well, I think what we did was we just facilitated them to come up here to our office and do the closing. We got it done on time. But if it needed to be extended because nobody's defaulting, it's out of the control of the parties, the contract is telling them what happens now. How do we fairly and equitably do it? And to be honest with you, it sucks. What if you do have that mover lined up? What if you do have your closing lined up at where you're moving to?
It's an active
When
element.
force majeure
It
comes
does
in,
suck.
it's in the
It
contract, but it doesn't mean it doesn't suck for somebody.
Yeah.
What do you do if you're the buyer and you're living in a van, waiting for a place to sleep?
I've had to use that this year, by the way.
Yeah.
That force majeure, I've had to use it.
Knowing about it fully, not just knowing it exists, not having it move from your third bucket to your second bucket, but getting it into your first bucket, things you know, will give you so much confidence. Well, what if that hurricane comes in? Well, God forbid, here's the way it works. Really? And throw the word out. It's the clause.
A lot of agents don't know it, by the way. A lot of them do not know what it
Listen,
means.
as much as I give you guys a hard time, you guys know 5 times more than the average agent already. Even the ones who barely pay attention to me and have to be prompted 6 times on a text even to sign in for a Zoom meeting. Okay? So you guys are good at this. I'm that terrible guy who wants you to be even better. Okay? So I don't mean, I'm not being mean when I say that stuff. I just want more for you guys. Okay? All right. I promise to keep this within an hour, so let me go ahead and finish these last couple sections real quick. Occupancy and possession. Believe it or not, in a lot of the world, there's a lot of different customs for occupancy, okay? And they're not at close, they're like days or weeks after close to make it a little bit more flexible so that you don't have all your stuff in a moving van before you find out that closing is delayed or whatever, okay? That you have a couple of days to correct a walkthrough issue before you leave. But here it's basically keys at closing time. The keys change hands at the closing table, theoretically. We talk about the closing table. Back in the day, if there was a closing, there'd be 2 sellers on one side of the table, 2 buyers on the other, 2 scum-sucking realtors down at one end and a title agent at the other end. And we'd all get it done, it'd be done, everybody shake hands and hug.
Those were the days.
You know, your
I
customer
liked it.
come, you go,
We're still
no,
doing
really,
stuff
we
like
really enjoyed working with you.
No, okay.
Okay.
We're still disabled.
No, there wasn't a lot of hard.
But that's what it was very social, it was very fun. This CFBP and all those financial regulations basically made it impossible for the parties to be sitting in the same room
Yeah.
going over financial details. It took away one of the niceties of closing.
It did.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when closing happens, the keys are transferred to each other. That's the end of it. The seller has to be out and the buyer is allowed to go in. There are 2 exceptions to this. One is pre-closing occupancy. The buyer moves in before the closing, okay? And post-occupancy, the seller remains in the house after the closing. Those are to be avoided at all costs because they both open up huge cans of worms that rarely do the worms get out. But when they do, it's a freaking mess, okay? This is catastrophic problems that are gonna be generated in maybe 1% of the time, maybe 5% max, but they're terrible problems. I bought the house and the guy won't leave. I called the sheriff and they said it's gonna take me 90 days to evict him from a house I own that he never rented. What's going on, Mark? The buyer's all moved in, he's already done damage to the house and now he got turned down for his financing. What are we gonna do? How do we get him out? How do we hold him to repairing the house? There are ways to do this. If you run into a pre-closing or a post-closing occupancy, here's your rule of thumb. Hit Mark's speed dial. And at least let me quarterback you through it, okay?
Hold harmless.
Please, all right? If property is subject to lease or occupancy after close, many of you aren't aware of this, but if I rented my house out for a year today, signed a lease with Michael, who would live in my giant cavernous echo-ridden house for the next year, and then next month I decided I don't even want to keep it, I'm going to sell it to Rachel. When Rachel bought my house, she has to honor the entire lease. The only way to get Michael out of the house would be to negotiate with him
And
and
that's
pay him off or whatever he wanted to do, but he doesn't have to leave. He has all the rights and duties in that lease. They just transfer the word landlord or homeowner, whatever's in the lease, goes from being Mark to being Rachel. But you have no rights to move into the property. All lease agreements survive the transfer of the property. So that's what all this says, and it only matters when it's checked off. It also goes through what the seller needs to bring to the buyer at closing. For example, in this scenario we were just talking about, I looked up at Jill and she had a cat. There was a cat in the camera instead. That was funny. All right. One of the things I would need to bring to the closing is the funds that Michael gave me as a security deposit, which would have to be transferred to Rachel. One of the things I would have to bring would be if I received, today is January 15th, if I already had put January's rent in my thing, they would prorate half of it back to Rachel, right? So this goes over what you would need to accomplish that. Not gonna happen very often, but good to know why it's there, okay? We talked about assignability so many times, but for the newbies, 3 choices. You may assign and be released from responsibility, so you could assign this you could assign a contract that you were the buyer on to Austin and sign it all over to him, and then Austin could show up at your close and go, well, I don't have any money, okay? And then Austin would be responsible, and he'd say, that's okay, I don't have any money. But when they came back to you, you would say, nah, I'm released from responsibility. I didn't really want that house. And Austin just seemed to be willing to sign anything, so goodbye. Okay? The one that's most often checked is may not assign this contract. In other words, it's kind of like that on or before things. All changes to the buyer line of the contract or the seller line, if the seller is trying to assign it during escrow, would have to be agreed upon by both parties. We opt for the middle ground, that we may change the buyer's name to a trust or add somebody or subtract somebody from the buyer's line while leaving everybody responsible.
Yeah, liability doesn't change.
What I always tell you is that's the correct way to do it. That's the way the pros do it. But because only 5% of the realtors you deal with are pros, and most of them think they're experts, you will get calls all the time going, what did you check that off for? I don't want them to be able to sign the contract. From experience, I will tell you, say, okay, no problem, we'll fix it. It's not worth trying to explain what I just explained to you. If they're too stupid to know any of this stuff, I can barely teach you guys, and you're smart, and I know the contract inside and out. Now you're going to take that one step down, and you're going to try to teach an idiot.
Nope.
It's not worth it. The most you get out of that thing is not having to produce one addendum at some point and wait for signatures. It's not a fight that's worth having. Okay? All right. We did start 5 minutes late, so I'm going to go through financing. In financing, basically, the first thing I want to tell you about financing is there are 2 kinds of deals. Cash and financing. Wrong. Okay? And the words in there sometimes say that. There are contracts with a financing contingency and contracts without a financing contingency. So you might be dealing with somebody who's flush, but still wants to take out a mortgage. Okay? And if you check this is a cash transaction with no financing contingency, they can still finance. All you're saying is, we're so sure we're gonna get the money, and even if we don't, I can stroke a check for it. I don't need a financing contingency. I'd rather have the stronger offer than the protection that I don't even need, okay? So there's only two kinds of contracts, with and without a financing contingency. A is without, B is with, okay? So let's talk about B, because A is pretty self-explanatory. B says that this contract is contingent upon within. Okay, so the first bit of information, the first asterisk that they have, is to set how many days after the effective date you have to get the loan approved. Okay? And they say 30 days if left blank. So if you leave that blank, like most people do, you have now set a time certain for the elimination of the financing contingency, whether the deal is closed or the finance is accepted. Don't do that. Figure out what the closing, how many days till the closing date, and whatever that number is, that's the number you write in there. If it's 31 days, write 31 days. If it's 27 days, write 30 days. Okay? It's okay to go over as long, if you go over 30, it should only be to the closing date. How do you keep it at the closing date? Every extension of the contract, extensions of contract say the following: buyer and seller agree to extend the closing date till April 1st. Okay? All of the terms and conditions will follow, whatever you put in, okay? Only one change from you. Buyer and seller agree to extend the closing and the loan approval date. Everything else is the same. Okay? If you're moving the closing date that you set the loan approval date to, you've got to move them both together, or you're going to have that gap. And the gap can only hurt the buyer. It's either going to have no effect or it's going to hurt your buyer. It's never going to hurt your seller. If you're representing the buyer, which you are when you put a purchase contract together, I need you to do this. Okay? I need you to do this. Well, my customer's not comfortable with 35 days. They're willing to give you 30, but not 35. Well, it's going to take 35 to make sure that we can close on the loan. If they're not willing to wait 35, then we really can't do it. And we're certainly not going to eliminate 5 days where if there's an issue at the bank,
Right.
my guy's escrow money goes bye-bye. We're not doing that. I have to protect my buyer. I want you to be really clear on this. The reason we chose finance contingency is very simple. I know you already know this. My buyer cannot buy your seller's house without the financing. If my buyer doesn't get the financing, he's not independently wealthy. Okay? We're telling you that up front. It shouldn't matter that they tell him you're out on the 30th day or the 33rd day. It's going to take us 35 days to close anyway. Okay? Well, we want there to be a fire. So you're saying if we put a closing date of 25 days, you wouldn't give us 25 days? It would have to be 20 then? Well, no, I'm not saying that. Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay? You gotta understand this enough to have these you guys probably, when I say stuff like this, I wish I could talk like that. It's not that I'm a better talker. Half the people on this call are better talkers than I am. It's that I have more information in my head. Okay? If you can't teach something, you don't understand it well enough. That's an Einstein quote. Okay? And I ain't Einstein. But the only way to be able to come up with this stuff right off the top of your head and be able to explain it to people is for you to understand it thoroughly. It's conventional, it's an FHA, it's a VA, it's a other USDA is probably the most used in that blanket. Okay? It's a fixed, not an adjustable. Okay? It's never a fixed or adjustable. Okay? The tighter you leave this, the more wiggle room you give to your buyer. So put fixed. Another thing that people do is they don't put in a maximum interest rate, because if you read this clause, it says that in order to qualify as the bank would finance the loan, they have to give you a loan offer with an initial interest rate not to exceed, if you don't put a number in here, if left blank, then prevailing rate based upon the buyer's credit worthiness. What does that mean? Austin, how's your credit rate?
Good.
Good? Who's got a
Oh, excellent.
iffy credit rate?
No.
You could go in there and they could offer you, we can lend you the money, but we can't do it at 7%, it's gotta be 11%. 11%. That only ups your payment $400 a month. That's okay, man. I can't afford that, I can't buy it. You have no financing contingency, they offered you money. Protect your buyer. What do you put in there? Just don't put 7%. If it's 7.2 today, maybe 8. But ask them the question. And, you know, when you apply for the loan, at what point, at what interest rate wouldn't you be able to afford the loan anymore? Because I want to put a ceiling on that. Because if I don't put a ceiling, there is no ceiling. The bank could offer you the worst terms in the world, and that would consider me getting financed. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Buyer will make application within 5 days. That's really not onerous. Okay? But again, if you're doing it on Friday before Martin Luther King Day, you've already burned 3 days before you, or 4 days before you can even make it. That gives you 1 day. Because remember, calendar days, deadline days, right? Now, the thing in here that I wanted to make sure you saw was, if you don't do it within the loan approval period thereafter, close contract loan approval. Buyer's failure to use good faith and diligent effort to obtain the loan approval during the loan approval period shall be considered a fault under terms of contract. Okay? Almost impossible to figure that out and enforce it. Okay? Well, he didn't send us his wage thing for 4 days. Was that diligent effort, or it's just really hard to do it? Okay. Where is it? Okay, so if the seller may elect to terminate this contract by delivering, if you tell them you didn't get the loan, if you can't prove to them you got the loan within the 30 days, if that's what you asked for, they can cancel within 3 days. Okay. And the buyer gets his money back. But basically, and now I'm not going to keep reading it because I always lose it when they change the things around. But basically, what it means is if the loan approval period expires before closing date, okay, and then at that exact second in time, this becomes a cash transaction. The financing contingency is gone. If the financing goes south, you're out of luck. Okay. There is 2 check marks on here that you'll almost never use. Assumption of an existing mortgage. We've had a little bit of talk, and I sent you some training information or some educational material on assuming a VA mortgage or an FHA mortgage. And then the purchase money note, that means that seller financing. Okay? And we can get into that a little more when we get into the rider training. Okay, so I think we wrap that up in about an hour, and whatever else time we have is questions and answers. Okay, so go ahead, and who's got some questions or wants to, don't go over anything beyond where we stop, because tomorrow at 1 o'clock we'll pick up right on line 134 and do that part, okay? And we'll do this in 2 parts. So who has questions on anything we just went over?
I have a very generic, well not generic, but I'm curious. With the lease disclosure in here, what if your buyer has no awareness that there's a lease and the seller is an idiot and doesn't tell you that there's a lease in act? It hasn't been selected on there, so we move forward thinking there is no lease. What does that invalidate the contract? What protections do we have? We didn't know that.
Very few things survive the closing, okay? And actually the things that do in there, it says, like the seller's disclosure, If your seller commits fraud on his disclosure, that survives the
24-hour walkthrough
closing,
notice.
okay?
24-hour
There's a
walkthrough.
part in here where it talks about holding back 125% of estimated cost for repairs if they're holding the money in escrow for, say, a replacement roof, but they need the proceeds to do it, right?
Right.
That survives the contract closing, right? Those clauses, very few do. That would be a caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware.
For
That would be
24-hour notice, when you walk through there, you could say, that could be your time to address it. There's still someone living here. There's still someone it's not vacant. It's not within 24 hours. We're closing tomorrow. It's not what I thought it was gonna be.
You're thinking of incompetence, okay? But there's a lot of malevolent things that go on in closings, like somebody will go out and get a bunch of repairs done and say he's going, on the promise he's gonna pay in the closing, and then not, and they start slapping construction liens on the buyer, because you slap a lien on the house, not the person. Or they have liens that are being applied for that haven't shown up in the public record on closing day. They sign a document that says there aren't any, but you've got to be able to, that gives you reason to sue, but not definitely going to get anything out of that suit. So no, you just want to be, all you can do is all you can do, okay? But in the situation you just described, that buyer is going to want for all eternity to prove that you knew or should have known, okay? And what's likely going to happen is you're going to get sued and probably win. You know what happens when you get sued and win in real estate? You get to pay $1,000 for your trouble. That's the deductible for your E&O that we have a policy for. Pay $1,000, and how often do they run up a bill of $1,000 on a claim that is fraudulent? Every time. Because it's just like 5 lawyer hours. So they put the lawyer for 5 hours writing a letter going, you gotta be kidding me. $1,000. Okay? So it always behooves you. Now the good news is, you're getting sued for $500,000 and you pay $1,000. God bless America, that's what insurance is, okay? And you wouldn't wanna pay $100, because if you did, you wouldn't be paying $10 a transaction, you'd be paying $25 a transaction, because the premium would go crazy. So trust me, we're right where we wanna be with that, but you're always better off not to have a claim, even a bad one, okay? So just do your due diligence. One of the things we have to do is it's very easy to start feeling entitled, okay? So let's say that every deal you made was a Zillow deal at exactly the average of $3,300, and you sold 30 homes a year and made $100,000, right? You're not entitled to any of those, okay? You're not entitled to any of those. None of those 30 you're entitled to. And none of those people want to hear about your other 29. The whole world is their deal, okay? And the harder you work at being meticulous on your sales, the more of those 30 people will remember you. Or be the kind of guys who sit around at a cocktail party listening to horror stories about realtors and go, you know what? My realtor was awesome, you know? What was his name again? It's Austin Jesse. I got his card somewhere. You should call him. Okay? Those are the guys. There's a woman who's just retiring, who just retired 15 days ago, moved into a referral space. Jane O'Gwynn, been with Citrus Hills since that picture was taken back in the mid-'80s or late 80s she was working. She was the #1 new home or new condo salesperson for Greenbrier. It was all sold in 85, 86, and 87. She was the #1 seller of those units. That's how long she's been there. But she still gets calls today. Hi Jane, you're still in the business? I don't know if you remember me, but you sold a house to my husband and I back in 1991.
It happens all
We
the
haven't
time.
talked to you since then, but we're just curious, are you still in the business? We still got your card magneted to our refrigerator. Why did they do that? because she was a standout person.
did a
She
good
was
job.
not only pleasant and truly cared about her customer, she was so different than everybody else they were running into that she was memorable.
Mhm.
So having this knowledge, having these abilities to go even another step or two beyond what everybody else does pay off in the end. All right, other questions,
Nope.
comments, concerns, critiques? Ziegfeld's up front. Nobody knows that expression. I'm so old, aren't I? All right. All right, we are good. I'm gonna go ahead and close this down then, and I will be back live tomorrow, same bat